I'll never mark an omega like you." The words didn't just hang in the air. They dropped like lead weights, shattering against the imported marble countertops of Hunter Vance's kitchen. My hands were still submerged in warm, soapy water. I was washing a cast iron skillet, a mundane domestic task that suddenly felt like a sickening, cruel joke. I carefully set the heavy pan down on the drying rack. The water slipping down my pale wrists caught the harsh, blinding glare of the overhead recessed lighting. I didn't cry. That was the detail that probably confused him the most. My jaw just clicked shut, locking the agonizing pain behind my teeth. Hunter's scent, usually a crisp, commanding alpine pine that made my biology hum with safety, had violently mutated. It was aggressive, now smelling like a forest fire that had been poorly put out, leaving nothing but charred wood, oxidized metal, and suffocating ash. He was standing right behind me, a hulking, imposing wall of muscle and bespoke tailoring. He thought he held all the power. He thought his autonomy, his precious guarded freedom, was worth more than the raw, exposed nerve of my trust. My own scent, the warm, sun-baked chamomile he used to greedily breathe in every night, instantly vanished. My biology recognized the profound threat of his rejection and pulled the scent back, retreating into a tight, defensive shell of absolute chilling neutrality. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, folded it precisely in half, and laid it on the counter. "Okay," I said. My voice was a dead flat thing. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like a stranger who had just witnessed a car crash. "Then you won't have to." I walked past him without brushing his shoulder. I didn't scream. I didn't throw plates. I walked straight into the master bedroom, pulling my worn canvas duffel bag from the back of his massive walk-in closet. I ignored the expensive cashmere sweaters and tailored suits he had bought to mold me into a CEO's perfect presentable partner. I only packed my own things, my oversized flannel shirts, my worn-out boots, my heavy botany journals, and the specialized wooden box containing my essential oils and glass distillation vials. By the time I reached the front door, Hunter was standing in the hallway, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes shadowed with a frantic, unspoken panic that his alpha pride refused to vocalize. He didn't reach out. He didn't apologize. He just let me turn the brass handle. Seattle was weeping when I stepped out of the luxury high-rise. The relentless freezing rain of the Pacific Northwest lashed against my face, plastering my curly brown hair to my forehead. The cold water shocked my system, forcing the sluggish, biological dread down into a tight, hard knot in my stomach. I didn't look back at the glowing windows of his penthouse. I hailed a cab, giving the driver an address in the gritty neon-lit labyrinth of the Capitol Hill district, leaving the ghost of my presence to slowly evaporate in Hunter's sterile tomb of an apartment. The harsh yellow light of morning stabbed through the gap in the cheap vinyl blinds, carving a ruthless line across my eyelids. I groaned, a rough grating sound vibrating deep in my chest, and opened my eyes. The ceiling above me was peeling, stained with old water damage. The air in the room was thick and claustrophobic, smelling heavily of boiling cabbage, cheap ammonia cleaner, and damp drywall. My body was in open, violent rebellion. Alpha withdrawal was not a myth whispered in clinic waiting rooms. It was a physiological crash. Without Hunter's regulating pine scent, my core temperature fluctuated wildly. I was shivering under a thin, scratchy blanket, yet a cold, clammy sweat coated my ribs. Every breath I took felt like inhaling crushed glass. The bedroom door creaked open. Finn Gallagher, my beta friend and now reluctant roommate, leaned against the doorframe holding a chipped ceramic mug of black coffee. He wore faded plaid pajama pants and a heavy scowl. "You look like a corpse, Julian," Finn said, his voice completely devoid of pity. It was a stark statement of fact. "Your scent is absolutely rancid. You smell like bruised flowers and panic. Are you going into systemic shock?" I pushed myself up onto my elbows, my muscles trembling violently under the effort. "I'm fine." "You're a liar," Finn snapped, walking over and setting the coffee on the rickety nightstand. "There's a free clinic 3 blocks from here. We are going right now. You need heavy-duty suppressants before your nervous system collapses." Suppressants. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Industrial blockers were brutal on an omega system. They would completely flatline my hormones, causing migraines, severe nausea, and emotional blunting. They were a chemical straitjacket designed to erase my biology just so I could survive the heartbreak of being discarded. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror leaning against the opposite wall. I looked pale, fragile, and utterly pathetic. Is this what Hunter wanted? For me to poison my own body to hide from the pain he caused? My eyes drifted from the miserable reflection to the heavy wooden box sitting on the small, scratched writing desk. My distillation kit. I was a botanist. I understood the intricate chemical breakdown of nature better than anyone. I knew how to isolate a scent, how to amplify it, how to preserve it in wax and oil. A sudden razor-sharp clarity pierced through the feverish haze of my withdrawal. I slowly pushed the scratchy blankets off my legs and stood up my bare feet, hitting the cold, uneven floorboards. I walked over to the desk, running my trembling fingers over the cool glass of the beakers and the thick blocks of organic soy wax I had brought with me. I wasn't going to erase my biology to survive. I wasn't going to let Hunter Vance dictate my existence, forcing me to swallow bitter pills in a damp apartment while he lived comfortably in his pristine tower. My scent was valuable. It was warm, calming, and intoxicating. If my pheromones were nothing but a biological nuisance to him, I would turn them into a weapon. Finn. I called out my voice, finally finding its footing, no longer a fragile whisper, but something steady and profoundly cold. What Finn asked, crossing his arms. Cancel the clinic appointment. I'm not taking the blockers. Finn's eyes widened in disbelief. Julian, are you insane? Then how are you going to survive the withdrawal without your alpha's scent? I unstoppered a small vial of pure concentrated chamomile extract, breathing in the sharp, potent aroma that was so overwhelmingly, defiantly me. I looked at the glass tubes, a bitter, calculating smile touching my pale lips. I'm going to bottle it. I whispered, my eyes locking onto Finn's confused face. I'm going to melt my scent down, pour it into wax, and sell it to every stressed-out, sleep-deprived alpha in this miserable city. Let's see how long the great, untouchable Hunter Vance survives without his Omega. A month in Seattle can feel like a lifetime when it never stops raining, but the relentless gray downpour outside my tiny shop window was the perfect backdrop for my new reality. I called it the ghost scent. It started as a desperate midnight experiment on the scratched desk of my cramped apartment, but within 4 weeks, it had exploded into a lucrative reality. The hipsters, the overworked betas, and the high-strung omegas of Capitol Hill couldn't get enough of my products. They thought I was a master botanist blending rare essential oils. They didn't know they were literally buying my bottled biology. Every evening, I would sit in front of my glass distillation kit, bypassing the chemical suppressants Hunter Vance had practically forced me to consider. Instead of suppressing my pheromones, I isolated them. I extracted the warm, sun-baked chamomile that my scent gland produced in overdrive, mixed it with rich, organic soy wax, and poured it into elegant, frosted glass jars. It was the ultimate biological irony. I was monetizing the very essence that the city's most arrogant alpha had deemed unworthy of a permanent mark. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The air inside the shop was thick and humid, heavily saturated with the soothing aroma of my inventory. I was standing behind the vintage oak counter, carefully wiping down a brass display stand when the little silver bell above the front door chimed. Instantly, the atmosphere in the room violently fractured. Before I even looked up, my biology screamed a warning. A heavy, suffocating blanket of industrial deodorizer rolled into the shop, a harsh chemical bleach odor meant to mask something deeply unstable. But to an Omega who had slept next to him for a year, the disguise was pathetic. Beneath the sterile sting of the chemicals, I could smell the decaying, desperate undercurrent of burnt pine and oxidized metal. It was him. Hunter Vance, the untouchable CEO of Vance Construction the Alpha, who wore bespoke Tom Ford suits and commanded boardrooms with a single glare, was standing in the doorway of my shop looking like a fugitive. He was wearing a heavy, oversized leather jacket with the collar turned up to his ears. A thick black beanie was pulled low over his forehead, and despite the gloomy, sunless Seattle weather, a pair of dark aviator sunglasses covered his eyes. He looked ridiculous. He looked completely unhinged. I didn't freeze. I didn't drop the brass stand. The fragile, weeping Omega who had walked out of his penthouse a month ago was dead. In his place stood a businessman who fully understood the lethal power of supply and demand. Hunter didn't recognize me at first. The shop was a sensory overload of my concentrated scent, and his withdrawal symptoms must have been blinding. He stood frozen near the entrance, his broad chest heaving as he greedily dragged the air into his lungs. He looked like a starving man who had just stumbled into a banquet hall. His gloved hands were actually trembling as he reached out to touch a display shelf. I put down my rag plastered on my brightest, most impeccably detached retail smile and walked around the counter. Welcome to the Ghost Scent. I said, my voice smooth, practiced and dripping with corporate cheerfulness. Can I help you find something specific to soothe your nerves today, sir? Hunter flinched as if he had been struck by a physical blow. His head snapped toward me. Even behind the dark, opaque lenses of his aviators, I could feel the sheer, unadulterated shock radiating from him. His mouth opened, but his throat was too dry, paralyzed by the sudden overwhelming collision of my physical presence and the dense chamomile scent he had been craving on a cellular level. "Just you," he croaked. The sound was a broken, gravelly rasp that barely resembled his usual booming baritone. He took a stumbling half-step forward, his alpha instinct violently urging him to close the distance, to grab my wrist, to bury his face in my neck. I didn't back away, but I didn't offer my neck either. I simply tilted my head, my retail smile never wavering. "I highly recommend our premium line for severe anxiety." I interrupted smoothly, ignoring his pathetic attempt to say my name. I reached onto the top shelf and picked up a tiny 4-ounce frosted glass jar. This is our smoked chamomile blend. It's an incredibly concentrated biological pacifier, perfect for, say, intense insomnia or unmanaged withdrawal symptoms. Hunter stared at me. He was vibrating, caught in a brutal tug of war between his desperate biological need and the crushing realization of what I was doing. I was standing right in front of him, entirely unbothered, selling him the very comfort he had thrown into the garbage. He choked out his chest, rising and falling erratically. "I need it." "Excellent choice," I chirped, walking back behind the register and scanning the tiny barcode. I looked up, locking my eyes onto the dark lenses of his sunglasses. "That will be $500, sir." He didn't even blink at the astronomical, extortionate price tag. He was far too gone. With a shaking hand, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek, heavy titanium corporate credit card. He practically slammed it onto the counter. I swiped the card. The machine beeped a cheerful note of approval for the Vance Holdings corporate account. I printed the receipt, slid the tiny jar into a minimalist paper bag, and handed it across the counter. "Thank you for your business," I said, my voice dropping its cheerful pitch to something cold and definitive. "Have a wonderful day." Hunter took the bag. He didn't say another word. He couldn't. He turned and stumbled out the door, the bell chiming a cheerful goodbye as he vanished back into the freezing Seattle rain, clutching the 4-ounce candle to his chest like a lifeline. I watched him go, a dark, satisfying warmth blooming in my chest. The punchline arrived the very next morning. The shop bell chimed at exactly 8 in the morning. Caleb Miller, Hunter's closest beta friend and the chief financial officer of Vance Construction, walked in. He smelled faintly of spearmint, gum, stale coffee, and profound exhaustion. He marched straight to my counter and slapped a printed, crumpled expense report onto the polished wood. "Ciao, Julian." Caleb sighed, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. "Tell me this is a typo. Did you seriously charge the CEO of my company $500 for a single palm-sized soy candle?" I picked up a microfiber cloth and casually wiped down the glass display case. "It's a highly specialized botanical blend, Caleb. Supply and demand." Caleb lowered his hand, staring at me for a long, quiet moment. He looked around the fragrant, impeccably organized shop, then down at the exorbitant charge on the corporate statement. Slowly, a harsh, disbelieving laugh escaped his lips. "He's completely lost his mind," Caleb muttered, shaking his head. "He hasn't slept in a month. He's a liability on the construction sites. You've officially bankrupted his pride, Julian, and if this keeps up, you're going to bankrupt my accounting department." I smiled finally, letting the retail mask drop, revealing the fierce, unyielding omega beneath. "Then I suggest you increase his credit limit, Caleb, because he's going to be back." Hunter Vance thought he held all the power when he refused to mark my neck, but standing in my shop, armed with nothing but melted wax and my own biology, I realized the truth. The power had officially shifted. And I was just getting started. The Midnight Reserve was my masterpiece. It was a limited edition batch of candles that took me exactly 200 hours to formulate. I had distilled my own sun-baked chamomile pheromones down to their absolute purest essence, blending them with a dark, sophisticated note of aged cedar and a whisper of vanilla. I poured them into 12 heavy obsidian black glass jars. They were priced at $1,000 each, and my waitlist was already a mile long. I was meticulously arranging them on the center display table, my hands moving with practiced precision, when the silver bell above the door chimed. I didn't need to look up. My senses immediately registered the sickening clinical odor of heavy-duty medical suppressants. It smelled like rubbing alcohol, bleached cotton, and absolute biological despair. Hunter Vance stumbled into the shop. If he had looked like a fugitive last time today, he looked like a casualty of war. The bespoke tailoring was gone, replaced by a rumpled gray cashmere sweater that hung loosely on his massive frame. His skin carried a translucent, sickly pallor, and the dark, bruised shadows beneath his eyes were stark against his sharp cheekbones. The pharmaceutical blockers he was swallowing to survive my absence were systematically destroying his nervous system. He didn't walk with the commanding, predatory grace of an apex alpha. He dragged his feet, his balance visibly compromised by the vertigo-inducing side effects of the drugs. "Julian." He rasped his voice, a hollow, rattling sound. He walked toward the center table, his bloodshot eyes locking onto the dark jars of the Midnight Reserve. "Please, I need one." "Those are spoken for Hunter," I said coldly, stepping between him and the display. "And frankly, you look like you belong in an emergency room, not a candle shop. Go home." "I can't sleep. I can't breathe," he muttered, swaying slightly on his feet. He reached out a trembling, uncoordinated hand, trying to bypass me to grab a jar. "Hunter, don't," I warned. It happened in a fraction of a second. The vertigo hit him hard. His knee buckled, and in a desperate, clumsy attempt to catch his balance, his heavy hand slammed down onto the edge of the display table. The wood tipped. Physics took over. A sickening cascade of shattering glass echoed through the quiet shop. 6 jars of the Midnight Reserve hit the hardwood floor, exploding into hundreds of razor-sharp obsidian shards. The concentrated liquid wax pooled across the floorboards, releasing an overwhelming, intoxicating explosion of my purest pheromones into the air. Silence descended on the room, heavy and absolute. Hunter stood frozen, staring down at the ruined masterpiece, his chest heaving. He looked completely, utterly horrified. I closed my eyes, took a long, deep breath to steady the violent spike of anger in my chest, and opened them again. "That," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "was $6,000 worth of inventory." Hunter swallowed hard, the muscles in his thick neck working convulsively. He reached into his pocket with a shaky hand and pulled out his sleek titanium corporate card. "I'll pay for it. I'll pay double. Just charge it." I snatched the card from his fingers, walked over to the register, and aggressively swiped it. The machine beeped twice, signaling the transaction was declined. I paused, raising an eyebrow. I swiped it again. The machine beeped again, indicating the account was frozen. A dark, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Caleb Miller hadn't been bluffing. The CFO had actually frozen the CEO's primary accounts to stop him from bleeding the company dry on my extortionate prices. I held the heavy titanium card between my index and middle finger, tapping it gently against the polished wood of the counter. I looked at Hunter, who was staring at the blinking red light on the card reader with profound, exhausted confusion. "Well, Mr. Vance," I said, my tone dripping with icy satisfaction, "it seems your accountant has finally put you on a financial leash. Your card is frozen." "That's impossible." Hunter choked out, panic flaring briefly behind his dull eyes. "Run it again." You have a $6,000 debt in my shop." I interrupted, my voice cracking like a whip. I walked around the counter, pulling a heavy green canvas work apron from a hook on the wall. I walked right up to him, entirely unbothered by his towering height, and threw the apron hard against his chest. Hunter reflexively caught it, looking down at the rough fabric. "I don't accept I owe us," I told him, crossing my arms over my chest. "Grab a broom, Alpha. You're going to work off every single cent as my unpaid intern." For a second, I fully expected the old Hunter to snap. I expected his wounded pride to roar, for him to throw the apron back in my face and storm out into the Seattle rain. But he didn't. Hunter looked at the apron, then looked at the mess of shattered glass and wax on the floor. Slowly, agonizingly, he pulled the strap over his head and tied the strings around his waist. The great untouchable billionaire Alpha grabbed a broom and a dustpan, sinking to his knees to clean up my floor. The power dynamic didn't just shift, it shattered as completely as the glass on the floor. Over the next 2 weeks, the surreal became my daily reality. Hunter Vance, a man who commanded a massive construction empire, showed up at the Ghost Scent every afternoon at 4 o'clock sharp. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He wore faded jeans and the green apron. He swept the floors. He broke down cardboard boxes. He hauled heavy crates of soy wax from the delivery trucks. He was clumsy at first, his heavily suppressed nervous system making his movements slow and rigid, but he never complained. More confusingly, he started fixing things. I never asked him to, but one Tuesday, the annoying squeaky hinge on the stockroom door suddenly went silent. On Thursday, the flickering fluorescent bulb in the bathroom was replaced with a warm, ambient light. He was weaving himself into the physical fabric of my life, performing acts of quiet, unspoken penance. It was infuriating. I wanted to hate him, but my anger kept slipping on the quiet devotion of his actions. The real crack in my armor happened on a busy Friday evening. The shop was crowded, and a flashy, overly confident alpha in a designer trench coat had cornered me near the register. He was aggressively releasing a slick, sickeningly sweet citrus scent, trying to use his biological weight to intimidate me into giving me his personal number. "Come on, sweetheart," the alpha purred, leaning his hands flat on my counter, crowding my space. "An omega like you shouldn't be running a shop all by his lonesome." Before I could open my mouth to verbally eviscerate him, the temperature in the room plummeted. A heavy crate of glass jars slammed onto the floor near the stockroom door with a deafening crack. Hunter was standing there. His eyes, usually dull from the blockers, were completely black. His jaw was locked so tight, the muscles ticked violently. He didn't say a word, but his suppressed biology violently rebelled against the chemical straitjacket. A microscopic, lethal spike of pure, aggressive burnt pine and ozone leaked into the air, a terrifying warning from an apex predator defending its mate. The flashy alpha froze. The color drained from his face as his own instinct screamed at him to run. He practically tripped over his own expensive shoes, backing away from the counter, fleeing the shop without a backward glance. Hunter stood there, his chest heaving, his massive hands gripping the edges of the wooden crate so hard his knuckles were bone white. He looked at me, a profound, desperate apology in his eyes, terrified that he had just crossed the boundary I had drawn. I should have scolded him. I should have yelled at him for releasing his scent in my shop. Instead, my heart gave a treacherous, heavy flutter. Later that night, the sky opened up. A torrential, freezing Seattle storm battered the city. I locked the front door of the shop, pulling up the collar of my jacket, dreading the miserable 4-block sprint to the Capitol Hill light rail station. I turned around. Hunter was standing under the flickering amber glow of the street lamp. He wasn't wearing his apron. He was wearing his heavy leather jacket, holding a massive black umbrella. He looked cold, exhausted, and entirely focused on me. He didn't say a word. He just stepped forward and held the umbrella out, creating a silent, dry sanctuary in the middle of the deluge. I hesitated, the rain plastering my hair to my face. Then slowly, I stepped under the canopy. We walked to the station in absolute silence. The only sound was the rain drumming a relentless beat against the black nylon above us. It wasn't until we reached the concrete steps of the station that I noticed his right shoulder. It was completely, entirely soaked. He had tilted the umbrella the entire walk. He had taken the brunt of the freezing storm just to ensure that not a single drop of rain touched me. He stopped at the top of the stairs, lowering the umbrella, letting the rain wash over his tired, handsome face. He didn't ask to come with me. He didn't ask for a candle. He just looked at me with a quiet, devastating reverence. "Good night, Julian," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. He turned and walked away into the dark, rainy city. I stood at the top of the stairs, clutching my jacket, watching his broad shoulders disappear into the mist. My heart, the one I swore was locked in an impenetrable vault of ice, and pride began to slowly, terrifyingly thaw. The torrential storm from that Friday night seemed to have washed away the sharpest edges of the hostility between us, leaving behind a fragile, terrifying kind of quiet. Hunter Vance, the billionaire CEO of Vance Construction, was still wearing my green canvas apron, still hauling heavy crates into my stockroom, and still looking at me like I was the only source of oxygen in the city. It was a Thursday evening, merely 30 minutes to closing, when that fragile quiet was violently shattered. The silver shop bell didn't just chime, it violently clattered against the glass as the front door was shoved open with aggressive, careless force. Marcus Thorne walked in. Marcus was a regional wholesale distributor I had been actively trying to cut ties with. He was a dominant alpha, loud, excessively entitled, and someone who fundamentally believed that an omega running a profitable business without an alpha's protection was an unnatural anomaly that needed correcting. His scent invaded the room before he even spoke, a suffocating, cloying wave of heavy musk and rotting citrus. It was the olfactory equivalent of a physical threat designed to press down on an Omega's nervous system and force submission. Julian's sweetheart. Marcus boomed, ignoring the closed for restocking sign I was in the middle of writing. He swaggered to the counter, slamming a heavy clipper down on the polished wood. "You've been ignoring my calls. I told you my new distribution rates are non-negotiable. You need me to keep this little hobby shop of yours afloat." "It's not a hobby shop. Marcus and my lawyer already sent you the termination paperwork," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the nausea rising in my throat from his overpowering pheromones. "We are done doing business. Get out." Marcus's eyes darkened. The rotting citrus scent spiked, growing thick and suffocating. He didn't like being dismissed. He leaned heavily over the counter, his large hand shooting out to grab my wrist in a vice-like grip. The physical contact was a brutal violation, a biological trigger that sent a spike of pure defensive panic straight to my brain. "You're getting a little too arrogant for your own good." Marcus snarled, his grip tightening until my bones ground together. He was intentionally releasing a massive wave of alpha command pheromones, trying to force my knees to buckle. I couldn't breathe. My vision swam. Then the stockroom door slammed open. I expected the room to immediately flood with the aggressive territorial scent of burnt pine. I expected Hunter to unleash an apex predator's pheromone crush that would drive Marcus to the floor. It was the biological standard. When an alpha's mate was threatened, their biology turned into a chemical weapon. But the air remained completely devoid of pine. Hunter crossed the room in 3 massive strides. He wasn't radiating alpha dominance. He had violently, painfully locked down his own scent gland, actively suppressing his biology. He remembered my trauma. He remembered my absolute hatred of being biologically controlled and intimidated. Instead of fighting alpha to alpha, Hunter fought purely as a man. Hunter didn't growl. He simply grabbed Marcus by the collar of his expensive trench coat, ripped his hand off my wrist, and drove a bare, heavy fist straight into Marcus's jaw. The sound of the impact was sickeningly loud. Marcus stumbled backward, crashing into a display shelf, sending candles scattering across the floor. Stunned and bleeding from the mouth, Marcus tried to flare his pheromones again, trying to assert dominance. But Hunter was completely unresponsive to it, a ghost moving through the chemical warfare. Hunter grabbed him by the lapels, hauled him to his feet, and threw him bodily out of the front door, sending him sprawling onto the wet pavement of the Seattle sidewalk. "Don't ever come back." Hunter's voice was a low, mechanical rasp. He slammed the door shut, locking the deadbolt. The shop was dead silent, save for the sound of Hunter's heavy, erratic breathing. He stood by the door, his broad shoulders rising and falling. When he finally turned around, he looked wrecked. His knuckles were split and bleeding, dripping dark crimson onto the floorboards. I took a trembling breath, rubbing my bruised wrist. "Come to the back," I whispered. The stockroom was small and smelled of dried herbs and clean wax. I pulled a white metal first aid kit from the wall and gestured for Hunter to sit on a wooden stool. He complied silently, his massive frame looking incredibly out of place among the delicate glass vials and dried flowers. I took his heavy calloused hand in mine. His skin was freezing. I uncapped a bottle of rubbing alcohol, soaking a cotton pad. "This is going to sting," I murmured. "I don't care," he replied, his voice completely flat. I pressed the cotton to his torn knuckles. He didn't flinch. He just stared down at the top of my head as I worked. Up close, the absence of his natural scent was deeply unsettling. He smelled only of sterile soap, expensive fabric, and the faint coppery tang of his own blood. "You didn't use your pheromones," I said quietly, wrapping a white gauze bandage around his hand. "You could have crushed him in 2 seconds if you had just let your scent out. Why did you hold it back?" Hunter swallowed hard. He looked away from me, staring blankly at the rows of distillation equipment. "Because you hate it." Hunter rasped, his voice raw and entirely stripped of its usual corporate arrogance. "You told me my biology was a weapon. You told me I looked at you like you were a biological obligation. If I had used my scent out there, I would have just been another alpha, proving that our entire dynamic is nothing but chemical dominance." I stopped wrapping the bandage. My fingers lingered against his warm palm. "Hunter Bree," I started, but he cut me off, turning his head to look directly into my eyes. The walls he had spent 30 years building were completely, devastatingly gone. I didn't knock over those candles because of the withdrawal. Julian, he confessed the words tearing out of his throat like shattered glass. The blockers the clinic gave me completely flatlined my system. I don't feel the phantom bond anymore. I wasn't craving your scent when I came in here. My breath hitched. Then why did you come back? Because I realized that living in that pristine, quiet penthouse without you was a living autopsy. He whispered. He gently pulled his bandaged hand from my grip, resting it on his knee, careful not to cross the physical boundary I had set. I didn't come here for the biology. I came here for the man who argues with me over coffee. I came here because breaking your inventory was the only pathetic, desperate excuse I could think of to stay in your space without you throwing me out. I stared at him. The sheer naked vulnerability in his eyes was overwhelming. The untouchable billionaire had broken himself down to the studs, all for a chance to sweep my floors. My heart, traitorous and weak, ached to close the distance to press my face into his chest and let the warmth wash over me. But the memory of the cold marble kitchen, of his sneer, of his absolute rejection, was a scar that throbbed in the rainy weather. I took a slow step backward, putting a few agonizing feet of distance between us. I closed the first aid kit with a soft click. A broken jar can be swept up, Hunter, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to keep it even. And a debt can be worked off, but you broke my trust. You told me I wasn't worth the permanence. Hunter closed his eyes, a flicker of profound agony crossing his face. He nodded once, a slow, heavy movement of acceptance. I know, he said softly, and I will sweep these floors for the rest of my life if that's what it takes to prove that you are. Revenge, I was learning, was an incredibly poor substitute for oxygen. For the first few weeks, watching the great Hunter Vance sweep the hardwood floors of the Ghost Scent had been a potent, intoxicating thrill. It felt like justice. But as the relentless Seattle autumn dragged on, the thrill began to curdle, turning into a heavy, sickening knot of guilt in the pit of my stomach. The turning point arrived on a bleak, gray Wednesday afternoon. Hunter hadn't come in for his shift. Instead, the shop bell chimed and Caleb Miller walked through the door. The CFO of Vance Construction didn't look angry today. He looked entirely profoundly defeated. The faint ambient scent of spearmint gum he usually carried was completely buried under the sour metallic odor of deep professional and personal panic. He didn't walk to the counter. He just stood in the center of the room, his shoulders slumped. He collapsed this morning, Julian, Caleb said. The words hit the quiet room like a physical blow. My hands froze over the cash register. The air in my lungs suddenly felt too thin. What? On the site of the new downtown high-rise, Caleb continued, his voice tight-stripped of any corporate polish. His heart rate bottomed out. The paramedics said his nervous system is essentially shutting down. The medical suppressants he's taking to survive your absence are destroying his liver, and he hasn't slept a full night in 2 months. Caleb took a step forward, his eyes locking onto mine with a desperate pleading intensity. Vance Construction is bleeding out. He's missing meetings, he's botching contracts, and he's dumping his personal fortune into clinic bills and your extortionate candles just to keep from losing his mind. You wanted to teach him a lesson about supply and demand. Julian, congratulations. You bankrupted his pride, but now you're going to put him in the ground. The room spun. The satisfying, righteous anger I had been clinging to for months suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. I had wanted Hunter to hurt the way he had hurt me. I had wanted him to realize my value. I never wanted him to die. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Where is he? I whispered. He refused to go to the hospital, Caleb said, running a hand over his face. He's sitting in his truck at the waterfront site. He won't let anyone near him. An hour later, I was stepping out of a cab onto the muddy, chaotic grounds of a massive commercial construction site overlooking the Puget Sound. The freezing rain was coming down in sheets, turning the dirt into thick, sucking clay. The air smelled aggressively of diesel exhaust curing concrete and damp earth. I spotted his black truck parked near a skeletal steel frame. I walked over my boots, sinking into the mud, clutching a dented metal thermos against my chest. It was a pathetic domestic offering hot chicken and wild rice soup, but it was the only olive branch I knew how to extend. I knocked on the tinted window. A moment later, the door creaked open. Hunter was sitting behind the steering wheel. He looked absolutely wrecked. His skin was gray, his cheekbones sharp and hollow, and his eyes were bloodshot pools of absolute exhaustion. When he saw me standing in the rain, a violent tremor racked his massive frame. He looked like he wanted to reach out to pull me out of the storm, but he aggressively gripped the steering wheel, instead honoring the physical boundary I had set. Julian, he rasped, his voice barely a breath. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Move over, I ordered, my voice shaking. He blinked, stunned, but he didn't argue. He slowly, painfully shifted over to the passenger seat. I climbed into the cab, slamming the door shut, sealing us inside the quiet, cold interior of the truck. I unscrewed the lid of the thermos and practically shoved it into his hands. Drink it before I pour it over your head. Hunter looked down at the steaming soup, then up at me. His hands were shaking so badly the metal rattled. He took a slow sip, closing his eyes as the warmth hit his completely depleted system. We sat in silence for a long time, the rain drumming a relentless, isolating beat against the metal roof. I looked at his hands, at the raw, bruised knuckles from where he had fought Marcus for me. You're killing yourself, Hunter, I said quietly, staring out at the gray, churning water of the Sound. You're taking industrial blockers, you're sweeping my floors, and you're letting your company fall apart. Why? He stopped drinking. He set the thermos carefully on the dashboard. Because I'm paying my debt. I didn't ask for your life. I finally snapped, turning to face him. The tears I had been holding back for months finally stinging my eyes. I just wanted to know why. Why was I so repulsive to you? Why did you look at me in that kitchen and tell me you'd never mark an Omega like me? Hunter flinched. The question tore open the deepest, most infected wound between us. He leaned his head back against the headrest, staring up at the ceiling of the cab. He looked broken. Because of Chicago, he whispered, his voice cracking. I frowned, the anger faltering. Chicago. My parents. Hunter said the words bleeding out of him like a confession he had kept buried in concrete for 30 years. My father was a dominant alpha. My mother was a brilliant omega. They were a perfect biological match. He marked her when they were 20. Hunter turned his head, his dark, bloodshot eyes locking onto mine. There was no arrogance left, only raw, unadulterated terror. The bite is permanent, Julian. He continued, his voice trembling. It rewrites your nervous system, but it doesn't guarantee you'll actually like each other. By the time I was 10, they hated each other. They were fundamentally incompatible, miserable people. But because of the mark, because of the biological tether, they couldn't physically leave. If my mother traveled for work, she would go into withdrawal. If my father tried to sleep in another room, his alpha instincts would tear the house apart. They were prisoners in a biological cage, and they made each other and me pay for it every single day. My breath hitched. The pieces finally devastatingly clicked into place. Oh, when you bared your neck to me in that kitchen. Hunter choked out a single tear, slipping down his hollow cheek. I didn't see trust. I saw a trap. I thought my biology would turn me into a monster. I thought if I marked you, I would eventually destroy the only beautiful thing I had ever had. I told you I'd never mark an Omega like you because I thought you deserved to be free. I was trying to save you from me. He covered his face with his trembling, scarred hands, letting out a broken, agonizing sound that was swallowed by the rain hitting the truck. I sat completely frozen. He hadn't rejected my worth. He had rejected his own, his arrogance, his solitary lifestyle, his cruel words. It was all a desperate, misguided suit of armor built by a terrified little boy in Chicago who didn't want to repeat the sins of his father. Slowly, hesitantly, I reached across the center console. I didn't offer my neck. I simply placed my hand over his shaking, scarred knuckles. "You're not your father, Hunter," I whispered. He went perfectly still at my touch, his suppressed breath catching in his throat. We didn't solve everything in that truck. The pain of the past month couldn't be erased with a single confession. But as I sat there holding the hand of the broken billionaire, the ice around my heart finally completely shattered. That night, I went back to my apartment. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to my desk and fired up the distillation kit. I wasn't making a product for sale. I wasn't bottling revenge. I carefully extracted the warmest, most potent notes of my sun-baked chamomile. I mixed it with a pure, unadulterated soy wax. I didn't put a label on it. I didn't print an invoice. I was pouring a bridge, and hidden at the very bottom of the liquid wax, wrapped tightly in a tiny square of silver foil, was the ultimate gamble of my life. It was time to see if Hunter Vance was finally ready to come home. The agonizing part of creating a biological masterpiece is the waiting. I knew the exact mathematical burn time of the candle I had sent to Hunter's penthouse. It was a dense, slow-burning organic soy blend. If he lit it the moment the courier dropped it off, it would take exactly 48 hours for the wax to melt down to the heavy glass base. 48 hours for the flame to finally reveal the small silver foil packet hidden at the very bottom. I waited for 3 days. By Friday night, The relentless Seattle rain had morphed into a violent coastal storm. Thunder rattled the thin single-pane windows of my cheap Capitol Hill apartment. Finn was working a late double shift at the hospital, leaving me entirely alone with the ticking radiator and the suffocating weight of my own gamble. At 11:42 in the evening, a heavy, deliberate knock echoed through the quiet apartment. I froze. The mug of herbal tea in my hands trembled hot liquid sloshing over the ceramic rim and burning my thumb. I set it down on the scratched coffee table, my heart suddenly hammering a frantic, jagged rhythm against my ribs. I walked to the front door. I didn't bother checking the peephole. I turned the deadbolt and pulled it open. Hunter Vance was standing in the dim, flickering light of the hallway. He didn't have his umbrella. He was soaked to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, dripping icy rainwater onto the collar of his heavy leather jacket. But it wasn't his appearance that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the air around him. The sterile, sickening odor of the medical suppressants was gone. He had stopped taking the blockers. The raw, aggressive scent of burnt pine was radiating from him in heavy, erratic waves, but it wasn't the suffocating, arrogant dominance from a month ago. It was bruised. It was desperate. It smelled like a forest struggling to breathe after a devastating fire, searching for rain. He stood completely still, his massive frame practically filling the doorway. Slowly, he uncurled his right fist. Resting in the center of his scarred, calloused palm was a tiny, crumpled piece of silver foil and the brass spare key to my apartment. It burned down, Hunter rasped. His voice was incredibly rough, a deep, trembling vibration that sent a shockwave straight through my nervous system. An hour ago, the wax cleared and I saw the foil. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the doorframe to keep my knees from buckling under the sheer weight of his returning pheromones. "You stopped taking your medication." I threw it down the sink. He confirmed, his dark, bloodshot eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that burned. If I was going to hold your key, I needed to feel everything. I needed to feel the withdrawal, the pain, the absolute reality of what I almost lost. I stepped back, opening the door wider. It was a silent invitation. Hunter stepped over the threshold, moving into my cramped, shabby living room. He looked entirely out of place here among the mismatched furniture and stacked botany books, yet somehow his presence immediately anchored the room. I closed the door, sealing us in. We stood facing each other, separated by 3 feet of faded linoleum. The silence stretched heavy with the ambient sounds of the storm lashing against the building. I expected him to close the distance. Alpha biology is entirely predatory. When an alpha finds a willing mate, the instinct is to overwhelm, to claim to press the omega against the nearest wall, and demand the biological tether. I braced myself for the rush of power, ready to accept it. But Hunter didn't step forward. Instead, he did something that absolutely shattered every biological law I had ever learned. The untouchable billionaire, the alpha who commanded thousands of men and built skyscrapers, took a ragged breath and slowly sank to the floor. He dropped to one knee, then the other, kneeling on the cheap linoleum right in front of me. "Hunter," I whispered, my voice cracking in pure shock. "Let me speak, Julian. Please." He interrupted softly, looking up at me from the ground. His massive shoulders were rounded, completely devoid of their usual dominant posture. I spent my entire life building armor. I thought if I never marked anyone, I would never become my father. I thought keeping my autonomy kept me safe. But all it did was turn my life into a sterile, silent cage. He reached up with trembling fingers. He didn't reach for me. He grabbed the collar of his own soaked shirt and pulled it heavily to the side, baring his thick, scarred neck. He tilted his head back, exposing the vulnerable, pulsing alpha scent gland, the absolute center of his biological power. It was a gesture of profound, terrifying submission. An alpha never bared their neck. It was an evolutionary impossibility, a surrender of everything they were. "I don't need to mark you to keep you, Julian," Hunter murmured, his voice thick with unshed tears, completely raw in the quiet room. "If biology is a life sentence, I don't want you to serve it. Let me. I will be the one bound to you. I will be the one who can't breathe when you leave the room. Please." A single tear broke free, tracing a hot, devastating line down his cheek. "Mark me." My chest hitched violently. The sheer magnitude of what he was offering, his pride, his biology, his absolute unconditional trust, broke the final stubborn dam inside my heart. I didn't overthink it. I didn't hesitate. I took a step forward, dropping to my knees right in front of him. I reached out my trembling hands, coming up to cup his face. His skin was freezing from the rain, but his jaw was tight, bracing for a rejection he clearly felt he deserved. "You stupid, beautiful coward," I breathed, my thumbs gently wiping the rainwater and tears from his cheekbones. Hunter let out a shuddering gasp, his heavy hands coming up to grip my waist, clutching my oversized flannel shirt like a drowning man holding onto a lifeline. He buried his face in my chest, a broken sob finally tearing its way out of his throat. I leaned forward, pressing my face into the crook of his neck. The scent of burnt pine was overwhelming here, raw and aching. I opened my mouth, pressing my lips against the hot, pulsing skin over his scent gland. Then I bit down. My teeth broke the skin. A sharp metallic tang of copper flooded my mouth. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. The second the physical connection was made, the phantom tether snapped into a permanent, undeniable biological bond. Hunter cried out a deep, guttural sound of pure salvation and pulled me flush against his massive chest. A tidal wave of pheromones flooded the small apartment. The agonizing, bitter scent of his burnt pine was violently suppressed, immediately washed over and soothed by the massive sun-baked rush of my chamomile. The two scents didn't fight each other. They merged, twisting together into a completely new, intoxicating aroma of smoked wood and blooming flowers. He held me so tightly my ribs ached, but I didn't care. The cold, suffocating withdrawal that had haunted both of us for a month evaporated in a fraction of a second. The biological puzzle piece clicked perfectly into place, rewriting our nervous systems, tethering his racing heart to the steady, calm rhythm of mine. We stayed on the floor for a long time, tangled together in the dim light, the storm raging outside. He didn't hold all the power anymore, and neither did I. For the first time in our lives, we were perfectly, unconditionally equal. Seattle never really stops raining, it just changes its rhythm. Sometimes it's a violent, freezing lash against the glass, and sometimes, like today, it's a soft, rhythmic hum that makes the inside of a room feel like the only safe harbor in the world. It had been exactly 1 year since the night Hunter Vance knelt on my cheap linoleum floor and offered me his neck. I sat behind the vintage oak counter of the Ghost Scent, my eyes locked onto the glowing screen of my laptop. The digital clock in the corner of the monitor flipped to exactly 12 noon. I took a deep breath, moved the cursor, and clicked the publish button. The smoked chamomile collection was officially live. It wasn't just a candle. It was an olfactory autobiography. I had spent 6 months meticulously blending the warm, sun-baked essence of my chamomile pheromones with a deep, resonant note of aged cedar and hearth smoke. It was the exact perfect replication of how our apartment smelled on a quiet Sunday morning when Hunter was completely at peace. It was the scent of a broken alpha healing and an omega finally finding his anchor. I watched the site analytics spike violently, the numbers blurred. 9 minutes and 42 seconds later, the server briefly glitched. When the web page refreshed, a bold red banner flashed across the top of the screen, "Sold out." "Well," I murmured, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. That was fast. From the back of the stockroom, a low, rumbling chuckle vibrated through the air, sending a familiar, comforting shiver down my spine. Hunter walked out carrying a massive, towering stack of flattened cardboard shipping boxes. The great Hunter Vance, the billionaire apex predator of the Seattle real estate market. The man who routinely terrified subcontractors with a single icy glare was currently wearing my green canvas work apron. It was tied securely over a fitted black Henley shirt, the rough fabric stretching across his broad, muscular chest. "I told you to double the batch," Julian, Hunter said, dropping the heavy stack of boxes onto the packing table with a loud thud. "I am a botanist, Hunter, not a factory," I teased, standing up and walking over to him. "Quality takes time." Hunter turned to face me. The dark, bruised shadows that used to haunt his eyes were completely gone. His skin was warm, his posture relaxed, and his natural scent, a steady, beautifully regulated aroma of warm wood and fresh rain, wrapped around me like a heavy protective blanket. As he looked down at me, he tilted his head slightly. The movement exposed the thick, muscular column of his neck. Resting perfectly over his scent gland was a jagged silver scar, the bite mark. My mark. In the omegaverse, biology dictated that the alpha claimed the alpha marked and the alpha owned. But every time I looked at that scar, I was reminded that true power wasn't about enforcing a biological law. It was about having the absolute strength to surrender. Hunter had taken the biological tether upon himself, binding his vast, terrifying world entirely to mine while leaving my neck completely untouched. He reached out his massive, calloused hands, gripping my waist. He pulled me flush against his apron, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss against my jaw. "You're going to make me work all weekend packing these boxes, aren't you?" he murmured against my skin, his breath sending a jolt of pure electricity through my nervous system. "You're the unpaid intern," I reminded him, tipping my head back to catch his lips. "It's in your contract." The silver bell above the front door chimed violently, shattering our quiet moment. Hunter sighed heavily, his alpha instinct grumbling at the interruption, but he didn't pull away completely. He just rested his chin on the top of my head as we both looked toward the entrance. Caleb Miller stood in the doorway, shaking the rainwater from his black umbrella. The CFO of Vance Construction looked at the two of us, specifically at his billionaire boss, wearing a green apron covered in wax shavings, and let out a long, profoundly exhausted sigh. "I need 3 jars of the new collection," Caleb announced, walking up to the counter and slapping his titanium corporate credit card down on the wood. "My accounting department is threatening to unionize if I don't provide them with adequate aromatherapy." "You're too late, Caleb," I said, offering him an unapologetic smile. "Sold out in under 10 minutes. Caleb stared at me, then slowly turned his gaze to Hunter. "You run a multi-billion-dollar empire, Vance, and yet you allow your Omega to completely monopolize the only product that keeps your own staff sane. Are you going to let him do this to us?" Hunter didn't even blink. He reached over, picked up Caleb's credit card, and slid it back across the counter. "I don't make the rules here, Caleb. I just tape the boxes." Caleb pinched the bridge of his nose, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "You're a disgrace to alphas everywhere, Hunter. You've been completely domesticated. And I've never slept better." Hunter replied, his voice a low, smooth purr of absolute contentment. His arm tightened around my waist, his thumb drawing lazy, possessive circles against my hip. Caleb rolled his eyes, grabbed his umbrella, and turned toward the door. "Just save me a jar from the next batch, Julian, or I'm officially cutting his corporate expense account again." The bell chimed as Caleb disappeared back into the Seattle mist, leaving us alone in the warm, fragrant shop. Hunter turned his attention back to me, his dark eyes infinitely soft. He reached up his large hand, gently cupping the side of my neck, his thumb resting over my unmarked scent gland. He didn't look at it with regret. He looked at it with reverence. "Are you happy, Julian?" He asked quietly, the question holding the weight of everything we had survived. The terrible words in the kitchen, the agonizing withdrawal, the shattered glass, and the rain. I reached up, covering his hand with my own, feeling the steady, powerful thrum of his pulse, a pulse that beat in perfect, permanent synchronization with mine. "I'm home," I whispered. He smiled a beautiful, rare expression that reached all the way to his eyes and leaned down to kiss me again. The journey from the cold marble penthouse to this small, warm shop had taught me the greatest truth of all. Biology is nothing but a blank canvas. It can be a weapon, a cage, or an excuse for arrogance. Pheromones can force an attraction, and a bite can force a tether. But love isn't a biological leash. True love is the terrifying, breathtaking courage to take off your armor, to bare your throat to the person who has the power to destroy you, and trusting them enough to know they never will.